Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the September 30th edition of the Connect Online meeting. Good to be with you tonight. Of course, my name is Jonathan Jenkins. I am hosting here tonight. My partner is off this evening, doing some things for the West Side Church where he preaches out there in Round Rock. So he is a little bit occupied, can't be with us, but we will look forward to seeing him back here, Lord willing, next week. So I'll try to bring you home as best I can for the week. Been a good week here on Digital Bible Study. Do appreciate y'all tuning in and being a part of all the different studies that we have had on. A little bit short week for me, at least, with all the took a couple of days off with the hurricane coming through, but everything seems to be returning to normal here. Uh, we can say that here on the east side of Florida, west side of Florida, it's going to be a long time before things are normal. I don't know if you've seen any of the footage or the pictures coming out of the Fort Myers area and Sarasota and Naples, but it's just heart wrenching, and we certainly can keep those people in our prayers this evening. I still haven't heard, talking to Wade here in the opening, I still haven't heard anything from the brethren over there and like Joshua Cantrell, who's on with us regularly. I guess I need to redouble my efforts to try and get a hold of him, but I hadn't heard anything about them. Naples is just south of where that storm made landfall. So I hope the good brethren over there are doing well. But I don't. I'm sure the Lord Church. There's a congregation of the Lord's Church in Fort Myers. I don't know it though. But whatever brethren are over there, we're certainly praying for them as well. Anyway, as I mentioned, we got Wade Webster here with us tonight. We'll get to Brother Wade here in just a moment. It's good to have him back on the program with us tonight. If you would, please take a second, if you would, and like, share, subscribe to all of our social media pages, and share the video tonight. That would be greatly helpful. The links to the different platforms that we are on are in the description of the video that you are currently watching. And do check that, by the way, because we have presence on a couple social media pages like Rumble and Podcast and a couple other places there, or Podbean rather, that we don't stream to nightly. And so if you're a user of those other platforms, those other links are meaningful. We do have a Twitter presence. We are on some of those others as well. So if you use those other platforms, follow the links and go ahead and sign up on those other platforms. We'd appreciate that as well. If you want to support the work here at Digital Bible Study, you can do that with the stars and super chats on Facebook and YouTube, or by subscriptions either at our website, digitalbiblestudy.org, or at our locals page at digitalbiblestudy.locals.com. We will be saying a prayer at the end of the evening tonight, as is our practice here, one we enjoy doing with you and find great benefit in that. So if you have any prayer request that you would like to put in tonight, we would love to honor those with you and lift those concerns or those moments of praise up before our God this evening as we wrap up our week of Bible study together. To cap off that week, a good friend of the program here and a long time friend of mine and of Eric's, Wade Webster, is here with us. Trying to remember the first time I met you, Wade. It's probably back when Eric and I were at Memphis, would be my guess. I know I met a lot of the Websters over there. I know I met Alan. I had to meet you about that same time. Actually, I think I met Chuck first. I think Chuck and I were at Freed Hardeman together, and then we ended up at Memphis together. So anyway, go back a little bit with the Webster boys, but it's good to have you on tonight, Brother Wade. How you doing, sir?
It's good to be on. I appreciate it very much. I guess it was in Memphis area. I'm the only one that's really escaped that area. Chuck's still in Alabama, and Alan's kind of Memphis and Alabama. So I'm the only one that's made it this far west to kind of get out of that loop a little bit. But yeah, those were good times.
Yes, sir.
School preaching did a lot of good for all of us, and love and appreciate the brethren and the work that they're still doing at Memphis School Preaching. So.
Yes, sir. So how is your work going down there in the Houston area?
It's good. Yeah, no complaints at all. I don't know if anybody would listen if I had any, but I really don't have any. The brethren have been really good to me, and I'm getting to do a lot of things that I want to do, and hopefully doing a lot of good for the Lord. And the Lord's blessed me and my family, and so I can't complain.
That is outstanding. How is your family doing? Tell us a little bit about them, if you would.
They're good. I've got 2 daughters in college, so pray for
Mm.
me and pray for that, that struggle. I have
Let's
one
say
at
I'm praying for your
A&M.
checkbook.
Well, they're paying for their own college, so,
Oh,
they
that's
gotta
even
get the
better.
grades up and things like that, so I can't take credit for that, but they're working hard. One's at A&M, the other one's at Freed-Hardeman, and both of them studying education at the moment, so they're doing really well. And then I have a 14-year-old that's still at home, and she's working through Algebra 1, I believe it is.
Hmm.
It's a struggle for her. And then Parker, of course, preaches in Louisiana, in the Bossier City, Shreveport area. It's been there a couple of years and doing a good work. And so that's all the kids. And of course, Jennifer and I've been married 34 years. September the 8th was 34 years. And so God's blessed me with a good wife who supports me and helps me and does the lion's share of all the work that needs to be done. So
Okay.
God's blessed our family for sure.
I don't have any contact information for young Parker. I just had a thought as you said that we've never had him on here on Digital Bible
No,
Study.
he
And that,
would love to do it. He's doing a gospel meeting with me coming up
okay.
October the 23rd. We're going to be in Newport, Tennessee for a gospel meeting, a father-son gospel meeting. So I will preach half the time and he'll preach half the time. It's kind of unique opportunity for us to get to do something like that together. And of course, he can lead singing and do things that I can't do. And so, but he can preach as well. So he's going to share the preaching duties and to make it more fun for both of us, I think.
Well, if you'd send me some of his contact information, we'd invite him to have him on the
I
program. We'd love to
will.
have
I
him.
will. He'll be excited. He'll be excited.
That's something my dad and I have never done. I can't believe it. My dad and I have never done a father-son gospel meeting over the years. I don't know why. I guess nobody's ever invited us. That may be
Well,
why.
we did a lectureship at Missouri, the Show Me State Bible lectureship. We did that last year together. We spoke on the same night together, and so that's pretty neat. He's led singing for times when I've preached, and I can't lead singing for him, so I can't repay the honor there. But we have shared the pulpit at times, and it's a blessing to see your son grow up to do what you do and to excel at that and even surpass you in areas in his ability and
Mhm.
things he can do. That's encouraging, and I'm thankful that he decided to do that. We never pushed him to do that because we felt like preaching's a great life, but it's a hard life, and it's got to be something that you're committed to and something that you want to do, and it can't be something somebody chooses for you. And so we kind of let him choose that on his own. But I think we were very proud when he chose to do that, and knowing the difficulties, but also knowing the rewards that would come his way and the good that he could do.
Yeah, well, and I know you got to be proud about that, and congratulations on it, and I hope you have a good time at the meeting coming up here shortly. We need to get to your lesson. We're already about 10 after the hour, so I won't take up any more of your time. Interesting topic tonight: leading the resistance. You want to direct us to a passage or somewhere that we can get started tonight?
I'm going to use 1 Timothy 4:12 as the text for the lesson tonight, talking about young people.
Okay. Well, we are waiting for it and looking forward to it tonight, Brother Wade. So let me go ahead and turn the room over to you. It's yours for the rest of the hour. So go ahead and start preaching to us whenever you're ready.
I appreciate it. Those who know me know that I love World War II history. Really, I love history in general, but World War II history is my favorite portion of history. And so I'm always looking for, events and things that happened that I can use by way of illustration in my preaching and teaching. And I came across a story recently that I'd never heard before, never knew about before. So I found it interesting, and maybe tonight you will as well. You may be aware that from 1940 to 1945, German forces were in the country of Denmark. They actually flew over Denmark and they dropped leaflets telling the citizens of Denmark that they were now under the protectorate of Germany. That really means the occupation of Germany, because the leaflets told the citizens of Denmark that if they resisted, that they would be punished. But if they submitted to German occupation, that all would go well and they would be under German protection. And then when the war was over, they would just be a part of Germany and would enjoy all the same privileges and rewards that every German citizen did. And so the leaders of Denmark quickly agreed to those terms, and German forces flooded into the country. Now, Norway was not as quick to give in to German demands, and they resisted and they were punished because they did. But eventually, they too were brought into the German fold. Germany needed Denmark and needed Norway because they had railroad lines and they needed to be able to get the iron ore from Sweden into Germany so they could continue to build their war machine. And so it was necessary for them to bring these two countries in. And Denmark went in pretty easily. Now, the citizens of Denmark were not all that happy about being taken in by Germany and being occupied by Germany, even though they got to keep a puppet kind of government. And even though life continued in some ways as it had before, they still were not really happy about it because they weren't happy about German soldiers occupying their country and really robbing them of the resources that their country had. But there was little resistance to that, at least at first, until some middle school students, 14 to 16-year-old boys, became embarrassed that their country had been occupied and their country had not put up enough of a resistance. And so they decided to do something about it. Now, they named themselves the RAF Club or the Churchill Club. It went by both names at different locations. The RAF Club was named, of course, after the RAF fighters, Royal Air Force fighters of Great Britain, and how that they defended Britain against all odds to keep Germany from being able to take London and then to occupy the country. And so these young men named themselves after those brave British pilots. But they also named themselves the Churchill Club because of Winston Churchill and his speeches that roused the British people to, never surrender, never give up, to fight and to make this Britain's finest hour, which of course they did. And so these young men were a part of the resistance. Now these young boys, 14 to 16-year-old boys, didn't really have any weapons to use. The only weapons that they had at first were their bicycles, and they would ride their bicycles and do what damage they could do to the occupying forces of Germany. And some of the things they would do would be they would cut communication lines, or they would set fire to things, or they would turn street signs around or break those signs so that the German troops wouldn't know which direction to go. Just little things that were more of a nuisance than anything else. But it was the best they could do, and it was really all that they could do. They would make sure they would always spray paint, light blue spray paint on whatever they did so that everyone would know that that was the resistance that had done that act of aggression against the German forces. And so over time, Germany became frustrated with these young boys and what they were doing. So they tracked them down and they put them in jail, and they spent much of the war in jail because of their resistance to the occupation. But what happened over the course of time was because these young boys were willing to risk their lives in resisting the powerful German army, eventually the Danish people were moved to resistance because they thought within themselves, if these young boys are willing to risk their lives in order to maintain our freedom, then shouldn't we be willing to do that as well? And shouldn't we be moved to action because these young boys are so courageous and so brave? And so that's the way that eventually the resistance began in Denmark and eventually led to their liberation. And when I heard that story and thought about it, it reminded me of what Paul wrote to his young son Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12, where Paul told Timothy, "Let no man despise your youth, but be an example of the believers in word and conversation, in love and spirit and faith and purity." He wanted Timothy to be an example. The word example is a word that means to make an impression, to leave a mark. Paul said, "Timothy, I want you to make an impression. I want you to leave a mark. I want you to stand out among the people of your day." He said, "I don't want anybody to despise you, to despise your youth. To despise youth is to think lightly of it or to act as if it's of no value or no profit." He said, "I don't want people treating you that way. I don't want people thinking of you that way. I don't want people thinking of you as a middle school boy who really can't do anything by way of resistance. I don't want them to think of you as somebody who isn't powerful enough to take a stand. It isn't strong enough to resist. I want them to know that even though you're a young man, you can be an example, and you can be someone that leads the resistance. You can be someone who causes other people to stand up and to take a stand for their faith, to take a stand against evil, to do the right thing. And so when I heard that story, and when I thought about that passage, I thought about all the young men and young women that we read about in the Bible, and how that they were a part of the resistance. So often the resistance against evil and against the evil governments of the world and the evil things of the world, so often that started with young people who took a stand, and then later those that were older followed the example of those that were younger. Let me give you some examples of that, and let's talk about them for just a few minutes tonight. First of all, let's start in 1 Samuel chapter 17 and talk about David. David was just a young man when we first read about him in the scriptures. You remember in 1 Samuel chapter 17 that the Philistines have occupied Judah's territory, and they have aligned themselves in a battle against the Israelites. And you remember that the Israelites are opposing them, so there is some resistance, and yet there's not a lot of resistance. And the reason there's not a lot of resistance is because the Philistines have a champion, a man named Goliath, and he stands out, and he challenges them every day. He did that for 40 days, evening and morning, every day, 2 times a day. He would stand down and challenge them. So for 80 times, he's challenged them to come down and fight him, and nobody in Israel, including Saul, who stood head and shoulders above the rest of those in Israel, even Saul wasn't willing to come down and meet him. So go with me to 1 Samuel chapter 17, and let's read a little bit from this chapter and see how this young man named David is going to lead the resistance. He's going to be the one that finally gets the soldiers of Israel to react. And so we read in 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verse 11, when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, that's the words of Goliath, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. And so fear filled their hearts because of the Philistines and because of this champion who has come down to oppose them. Look at verse 16. And the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. And then go on down in the context, and you're going to see that David is going to hear this challenge. David's been sent by his father to check on his brothers and to bring some gifts from home, some things that will warm their hearts and let them know that they're loved and they're cared about. And so David does that. And as David's down there, he hears what Goliath says to the army of Israel, how he's defying the army of Israel and the God of Israel. And so David is moved to action by this giant enemy that's encroaching upon his people. So look at verse 26. It says, Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, What shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Now, the others weren't seemingly as bothered as they should have been by this giant's challenge, but David was. David was extremely upset that someone would dare to defy the God of Israel, and he's determined to do something about it. And so he's asking about it. His oldest brother was named Eliab, and Eliab hears what David asked, and Eliab, being the older brother, sees David as his little brother, and really doesn't think of David as being capable of doing anything. And so this is what Eliab says about David. He says in verse 28, Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and he said, Why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. Wow. Can you imagine having an older brother like that? I have an older brother. I can say he's not like that, and I'm thankful that he isn't. But can you imagine having an older brother who's angry that you came down and brought him gifts from home, and that is so upset that you're even asking about the battle, ridiculing you, and he's saying, did you come down to see the battle? Because you sure didn't come down to fight in the battle. You're not capable of coming down and taking a stand. You're not capable of coming down and opposing anybody. You're just a little boy. You keep a few sheep in the wilderness. That job was reserved for the youngest in the family. Sometimes it was even reserved for girls in the family if there weren't young boys in the family. And so he's saying, you're keeping those few sheep out in the wilderness. What are you doing down here? You're not a soldier and you don't belong among soldiers. So that was the thinking of his older brother. But eventually the words of David make their way back to Saul. Look at verse 31. Now, when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for him. Then David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against the Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." And so Saul's view of David is much the same as Eliab's, but it's a lot nicer. He doesn't have any personal anger against David. He isn't ridiculing David. He just says, "David, you're young, and David, this guy is a man of war. He's been fighting a long time, and he's 42-0. He's undefeated. Nobody's ever stood up to him. And so you're just not old enough and capable enough to be able to do this." He wasn't knocking David's courage. He wasn't making fun of David. He was simply noting what many would have said was obvious, and that is that David was too young to be able to do anything. And David speaks up, and David says, I've kept my father's sheep. That's true. That's what my job is. But I've had to fight lions and bears, and God's delivered me from their hands. And so this uncircumcised Philistine, he's defied God. And God's going to protect me as he has always done. God's going to defeat this enemy, and God's going to use me to do that. And so Saul eventually is going to go along with it. And of course, Saul's going to try to give David his armor and let David use his armor, but David can't even walk in that armor. That armor doesn't fit David because David is young and David is smaller than Saul. And so David's going to go down into battle with, if you will, bicycles. He really doesn't have any weapons to use, or not, the traditional weapons that we think about. He's fighting a man with a huge sword and a huge spear, and with an armor bearer that's protecting him, and a huge shield and helmet and all these things. And here's David, and David has a slingshot and 5 smooth stones that he's going to use. Now, I'm not knocking the sling as a weapon, but it isn't much of a weapon when you go up against the kind of enemy that David was going up against, because of the weapons that the Philistines had. And it's kind of like the boys in Denmark who were using their bicycles to cut communication lines and do the little things of nuisance that they could do. And so, it doesn't appear to be very much. In fact, if you look at what Goliath is going to say about it in verse 42, when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good looking. So the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. So the Philistine has the same impression of David that Saul had and that Eliab had. And he says, "You're just a boy, and you've come down against me with a stick and with a slingshot. You haven't come down against me with anything that is fitting, me being a champion, me being a man of war. And so, why did you come down to me with these weapons, which really aren't even weapons as far as he was concerned?" Of course, David's going to explain that God's going to give him the victory. And of course, that's exactly what's going to happen, because David had the courage to lead the resistance in Israel. And what we see happen is that David does run to meet the Philistine. He lets that stone fly. And of course, God, through his providence and through David's courage and through all these things working together for good, that stone's driven home into the forehead of Goliath, and Goliath falls down. And David, of course, takes Goliath's sword and cuts off Goliath's head. And then all of Israel is moved to action. If you look later on in the context, I want you to look at what happens in verse 52. Now the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Shuraim, even as far as Gath and Ekron. Now I want you to think about Gath and Ekron, Goliath of Gath. So they ran them all the way back home. They ran them all the way back to where they came from. They ran them all the way back to Gath and Ekron. And so they gained a great victory here. But David was the one that led the resistance. David was the one that got them into moving into going against the Philistines. Verse 53, then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. So here's David leading the resistance. What a great example that is. But now go to the book of Daniel, and let's notice some others in the Bible who led the resistance. I love the story, of course, in Daniel. There are several young men in Daniel that stand out as leaders of the resistance. There's Daniel in chapter 1, and then there's Daniel's three friends as well. And they all are stand out as examples. That's what Paul was talking about in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12. They all stand out as examples. They all left their mark. They all left an impression. We're still talking about them all these years later and talking about their courage and their faith and their purity and all the things that Paul was talking to Timothy about. They're examples of that. And so in Daniel chapter 1, the enemy has entered into their land, has carried them away captive. And so verse 8 says that Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's meat. So Daniel has this purpose of heart. Daniel's a young man. He's been carried far away from home, far away from his family, far away from everything he's ever known. They're going to change his name. They're going to change his education. They're going to change everything they can to try to make him a Babylonian. But he's never going to be a Babylonian. He's always going to be a Hebrew. He's always going to be one of God's children. He's always going to remember God. And he does here, and he purposes in his heart that he won't defile himself. He won't eat the meat that the king's giving him to eat. Some reasons behind that: perhaps it had been strangled, had not been properly bled according to the dietary laws of the Jews, or maybe it had been offered to idols, and so it violated Daniel's conscience in order to partake of it. But whatever reason, he requested a different diet of his keeper, the keeper of the eunuchs. And this keeper is afraid to do that because he knows his life is on the line. If Daniel and these young men don't stand out, then if the king finds out about this agreement that he's made with Daniel, then his head will be the one that's on the chopping block. And so he's concerned about it. But Daniel convinces him to give him a test. And after 10 days, if they don't appear better, then okay, then we'll go back to your way. But otherwise, you'll do it according to the agreement that we've made. And so that's what he does. And at the end of this period of testing, of course, they're found to be 10 times better than all the other young men that were part of this test because God's blessing them and helping them. But in Daniel chapter 3, we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the names that we usually know them by. But they're leaders of the resistance. They're young men that were with Daniel in Babylon. But the king has set up this great image, perhaps an image of himself, maybe an image to one of his gods. But when certain musical instruments are played, everyone's going to bow down to that image and worship that image. Well, if you're a Hebrew, you can't do that. You can only worship the living God. You can't worship a dead idol. And so Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are not going to be able to bow down. They're not going to be able to worship this if they're going to be faithful to God. And so when these musical instruments are played, of course, they are left standing. Everyone else bows. So they stand out like a sore thumb, and they're going to be reported to the king. And so that's what we see in Daniel chapter 3. Won't you look at verse 9 beginning? They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony, with all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews who you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods to worship the gold image which you have set up. And Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve the gods, my gods, or worship the gold image that I have set up? Now, if you were ready at the time, you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, and symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not, the king continues, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver and from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. So here are these young men who are leading the resistance. Everybody else is bowing down, going along with it, and these young men are not willing to do that. They're going to take a stand for their faith. They're going to lead this resistance in Babylon, this resistance to Nebuchadnezzar. So he heats this furnace up 7 times hotter than it's ever been heated, and has his guards to go and cast them in the fiery furnace. Of course, we know that they're going to be protected. There's going to be a fourth man in the furnace with them, and he's going to protect them. And when they take them out of the fiery furnace, they're not even going to have the smell of smoke on them. God's going to deliver them. But here are young men who are leaving their mark, leaving their impression because of their faith, because of their willing to stand up for what God would have them to do. But then in Daniel chapter 6, we read of Daniel and Daniel's willingness to do that. And we saw in Daniel chapter 1 and verse 8 that he purposed in his heart. But then we didn't read about him in chapter 3, not really sure why he wasn't with the others at that time, but evidently he was not. But in Daniel chapter 6, we read about him, and we see him involved in the resistance as well. Now, you may note from Daniel chapter 6 that by the time we read of Daniel in that chapter, Daniel's already an old man. He's not a young man anymore. And so you might think, well, this is not a good example to use because he's not a young man anymore. And so he's not a young person leading the resistance. We've already seen that as a young man, he did that, Daniel chapter 1. And so he continues to do that throughout life. And in Daniel chapter 6, even though he's older, he's still leading the resistance. And in Daniel chapter 6, we have Daniel standing up when the king makes a decree that you can't make a petition of any god or any man for 30 days. You know, most people just go along with that and just kind of give in to that. But Daniel's not going to do that. It says in verse 10, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Since he was really young, he's had this practice, and he's not giving up this practice. He's not going to quit doing this. He's older now, but he's still a part of the resistance. He's still going to stand up for what's right. He's still going to oppose the enemy when the enemy is opposed to the ways of God and the things that God wants done. Of course, he's thrown into the lion's den. The lions don't harm him. And the men who had accused him, they are thrown in the lion's den, and they don't even get to the bottom before the lions are already devouring them. And so here's Daniel, preserved by God because he was willing to stand up for God and be a part of the resistance. Let's talk about some others that were a part of the resistance. What about Josiah? We love Josiah. We love to read about his life. 2 Kings chapter 22 is where a portion of his story is recorded, a portion we're going to notice tonight. In 2 Kings chapter 22, we find that Josiah was just 8 years old when he became king. Now, that's not even a middle school boy there. That's younger even than that. He becomes king, but he's going to be a king who's going to do what was right in God's sight. Look at verse 2. And he did what was right in the sight of the Lord and walked in all the ways of his father David. He did not turn aside to the right hand or to the left. Here's a king that's going to be a part of making an impression. He's going to leave his mark on Israel and Judah. He's going to leave his mark on God's people by taking a stand for what's right. Look at 2 Samuel chapter 23. We read a little bit more about what he did. And what he did is rather impressive. Now, this is a little further in his reign, a little deeper in his reign. So he's older by this time. But he started this when he was young, and now he's continuing it. It says in verse 3 of 2 Samuel 20, or 2 Kings 23, then the king stood by a pillar and made a covenant before the Lord to follow the Lord and to keep his commandments and his testimonies and his statutes with all his heart and with all his soul, to perform the words of the covenant that were written in the book. And all the people took a stand for the covenant. So they're taking a stand because the king's taking a stand, because the young man's taking a stand. They're going to take a stand. Verse 4, the king commanded Hilkiah the high priest, the priest of the second order, the doorkeepers, to bring out of the temple of the Lord all the articles that were made for Baal, for Asherah, for all the host of heaven, and he burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron and carried their ashes to Bethel. Then he removed the idolatrous priest whom the kings of Judah had ordained to burn incense. Look at verse 6. He brought out the wooden image from the house of the Lord to the brook Kidron outside Jerusalem, burned it at the brook Kidron, and ground it to ashes. Verse 7, then he tore down the ritual booths of the perverted persons. Verse 8, he's going to defile the high places where the priests had burned incense. He's going to break down the high places at the gates. On and on we're going to read down through here of him defiling things and removing things and burning things and breaking down things, and even of doing that with people, getting rid of the false priests, having them put to death, burning bones upon the altar. Well, we're going to read about all of that, because here's a young man who's taking a stand for God, and he's going to lead Israel. He's going to lead them in the right direction. He's going to lead them in the way that they ought to go, because he's a young person who's going to take a stand for God. He's a great example of that. But let me give you another one. Let's go to the book of Esther. You know, I didn't tell you with the RAF club and the Churchill club that there were some young girls that also helped. They were not generally the members of the club, but they helped in various ways to be a part of the resistance. And so Esther falls in that category of a girl who's a part of the resistance. You remember that we're reading about the Persians, and we're reading in chapter 1 of a woman named Vashti, a queen who was deposed because she wouldn't show her beauty before a group of drunken men. And so in chapter 2, to cheer up the king, there's a beauty pageant. And Esther is included within that beauty pageant because she's a beautiful young woman, and she's going to be brought in. The king, of course, is going to select her, and she's going to be the next queen. But if we read about that, look at verse 7 of chapter 2. Mordecai had brought to Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman was lovely and beautiful. When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. And so she's a young woman at this point, not very old. She's called a young woman again in verse 8. She's called a young woman in verse 9. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. And so we read over and over again that this young girl is going to be selected by the king. Now, when we get to Esther chapter 4, you remember that Haman has made a decree that all the Jews are to be killed on a certain date. And so Mordecai has gotten word to Esther so that Esther knows about it. And he's asking Esther to get involved in it and see if she can't do something to prevent it. And Esther's reluctant to do that because she knows the rules of Persia, and she knows you can't go in before the king unannounced. That's a dangerous thing to do, and the king might very well have you put to death. And it's been some time since the king's called her, and so she may not be as much in favor as she was at one point. And so she's concerned about it. But here's what Mordecai says in verse 13 of chapter 4. Mordecai told them to answer Esther, do not think in your heart that you will escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Who knows, Esther, whether or not God is going to use you to be the one to deliver his people from this destruction? Who knows? I don't know that. He's not speaking adamantly. He's not saying, I know this for sure. He's not saying God's revealed this to me, but he's saying, if you as a young queen are willing to stand up, you're willing to take a stand, then you can be a part of the resistance. You can lead this resistance against this death decree that's been brought upon all the Jews in the land of Persia, and we can do something about this. So in Esther chapter 7, of course, the king has received Esther. Esther has made some petitions for the king to come to her house for dinner. He's done that, and so she finally gets to the point of revealing the problem. In Esther chapter 7 and verse 3, the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although the enemy could never compensate the king's loss. So King Ahasuerus answered and said to Queen Esther, who is he, and where is he, who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? And Esther said, the adversary and the enemy is this wicked Haman. So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. Can you imagine Haman sitting there? He's been invited to the king's house. He thinks he's better than everybody else because he's the only one that got invited. And all of a sudden, Esther turns and says, here's the guy. Here's the one who's threatened me. Here's the one who's threatened all the Jews in the land. This wicked guy named Haman. Haman has been found out. And Haman is going to quickly be hanging from the gallows that he's built for Mordecai. Why? Because Esther is a young woman who's leading the resistance. Esther is a young woman who's standing up for God. Esther is a young woman who is willing to do what those that are older either cannot do or will not do. She's going to lead God's people. God's going to use her to do great things. Now, when we think about this today, and we think about the application of these examples from Old Testament, Romans chapter 15, verse 4, the things that were written aforetime were written for our learning, and we through patience and confidence of the scriptures might have hope. And so God gave us these examples for us to learn from them. And they become the perfect illustration of what Paul was saying in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12. Let no man despise your youth. Don't let anybody think you're not capable of doing something just because you're young. Don't let anyone put you down because you're young. You leave your impression. You leave your mark. You be an example of them, of all of these things. And these young people we've talked about, they were examples of word, spirit, faith, purity. They were examples of those qualities. They were leading the resistance when it came to those qualities in their lives. Young people are continuing to do that today. I know that there are young people today that don't dress the way they ought to, and they don't talk the way that they ought to, and they don't show the respect that they ought to for God and for their parents and for authority. I know that there are a lot of problems. I know there are drugs and alcohol, and I know there's all kinds of bad music and movies and all the things that we think about that sometimes go with that portion of life of youth, as these youthful lusts that tempt them and sometimes lead them down the wrong pathway. Sometimes young people get a reputation for those kinds of things, but there are good young people. There are young people that stand out. There are young people who are willing to stand up for their faith. There are young people who say, I'm not going to dress that way. I'm not going to talk that way. I'm not going to go to that movie. I'm not going to listen to that song. There are young people that were willing to be a part of the resistance today. They're willing to stand up for God. They're willing to be an example of what a Christian ought to be. And sometimes they challenge those of us that are older. And sometimes, like those in Denmark, we say, you know what, if young boys and young girls can take a stand for what's right, why am I being silent? Why am I letting the government? Why am I letting, the people at my work, or why am I letting my neighbors, or why am I letting people in society, keep me from using my voice and speaking up for God and taking a stand and doing the right thing? If they're willing to do it and suffer for it, surely I ought to be willing to do that. And so they become an example for me and for you, and challenge us to do that. Because I want us to finish here. I want us to get to James chapter 4 and verse 4 and verse 7. I want us to get there because I want you to understand that we're living in enemy occupied territory. You see, Satan is the God of this world. And as the God of this world, Satan he's a powerful enemy. Paul talks about Acts chapter 26 and verse 18. Paul was chosen to turn men to the light of the gospel and to deliver men from the power of Satan. He's powerful. Paul's going to say in Ephesians chapter 6 and verses 10 through 17 that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against the rulers of darkness in high places. I mean, we've got strong enemies that are against us. Nazi Germany, that was a pretty strong enemy for those that were in Denmark. And so they were wrestling against a very powerful force. That did not mean that they were free just to go along or to give in. They had to resist that which was wrong, that which was evil. And we have to do the same thing. And so in James chapter 4 and verse 4, James is going to explain to those of his congregation, of his people, he's going to say, ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore be a friend of the world, he's the enemy of God. James says, you can't be a friend of the world and a friend of God at the same time. If you become a friend of the world, if you go along with the evil forces that are in operation in this world, and you just go along with them and you remain silent because of their threats or because of the punishment that you're afraid that you receive, James says, you become the enemy of God. You need to be a part of the resistance. And that's what he says in verse 7. He says, submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he'll flee from you. You see, a part of submission to God is resisting the devil. It's standing up to the devil and saying, other people may go along with you, other people may believe your lies, other people may be put to silence because of you, but I'm not going to be. I'm going to stand against you. I'm going to resist you with everything that I have. I'm going to follow the example of my Lord. When you tempt me, I'm going to quote scripture to answer you. And when you try to get me to do the wrong thing, I'm going to hold my ground. I'm not going to. God didn't give me armor for the back. God gave me armor for the front, and God gave me armor that can stand up to you. And I'm going to stand and I'm going to hold my ground. I'm going to be a part of the resistance. Far too often today, we allow the big bullies of our world, whether it's humanism or atheism or in morality or whatever it is in our world, we allow those things to kind of bully us and get us to be quiet and get us just to be passive. We can't do that. We've got to be a part of the resistance. We've got to be willing to stand up for God. And I'm thankful for young people. I'm thankful for young people at our colleges that are standing up and saying, listen, I'm waiting until marriage. Listen, I don't drink alcohol. I don't go to parties like that. I don't go to movies like that. I don't listen to music like that. I don't do those things because I'm a Christian and my faith means something to me. And I'm going to stand up for it. And I'm going to be an example, not only to the other young people around me, but I'm going to be an example to those that are older, that they might as well take a stand. You know, that's true, not just people at secular universities, that's people at what we call Christian universities. Have to be willing to take a stand there too. Because just because you're at a Christian university does not mean everybody's going to dress the way they ought to dress or talk the way they ought to talk or do what they ought to do. You got to be willing to stand up even among those who claim to have the same faith, claim to serve the same God, claim to worship the same way you do, who may not be willing to resist the peer pressure that's in the world. You've got to be a part of the resistance. And so I'm very thankful that you on a Friday night are willing to tune in and listen to these words and see these examples from the Word of God. I hope it's encouraged your soul. I know it's encouraged mine, and maybe we've encouraged some young people as well to be a part of the resistance and to challenge those that are older to do the same thing. So thank you for being with us tonight.
Wade, appreciate that, man. That was encouraging. A great approach to it too. I love the way you went through all those different examples. It's amazing how many examples there are of young people in the Bible who have done great things on the behalf of God. I love how you pulled all of those together, man. Thank you, sir.
I appreciate that. Sure do. I'm thankful for the young people. I've got 4 kids, and I hope that they're a part of that. I hope they're a part of representing God first and foremost, but representing mom and dad as well. As so we've taught them to live and do better than those around them sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it is a good lesson to instill in young people. Not let anybody despise your youth. Doing the right thing, no matter what age you are, doing the right thing can be a great source of encouragement to others and spur other people on to do right. And I hope the thoughts in this lesson will encourage us because our audience is not the youngest audience in the world. Wade, I don't know if you know
No,
that or
that's
not.
true. No, that is true. We all know young people who I think challenge us and
But
motivate us. And I, and
but
I hope that we pay more attention to them and kind of give them some encouragement because we
but
get we get paid back when we do that. When we take interest in their lives and we participate in their lives, they pay us back by giving us a little bit more zeal and giving us a little bit more get up and go than what we sometimes have. And
yep,
so God uses them for an example for a reason because He knows that we kind of get settled down in our lives and in the things that are going on. And we don't do the things that we did when we were younger. So God sometimes challenges us by them.
yeah, yeah. Well, some version of what you taught tonight may get repeated down here in Central Florida
A
by a
good deal.
preacher.
Well, it'll be improved when it does. So I'm excited about that part.
All right, brother. Hey, thank you for coming on tonight. Always encouraged to see you. We wish you well in your work there in the Houston area. I think you told me you got a mission trip coming up to Mexico here in a few
I
weeks,
do.
maybe.
Middle of December, December 16th, along about then, we'll be down hopefully in South Mexico and be with some good brethren down there, and maybe a trip to Peru come first of the year. A couple of
Okay.
trips, kind of getting back some of those that's getting started in full swing again. So excited about it. Of course, preaching schools, Brown Trail and Southwest, and the work that they're doing, and I get to be a small part of their work. Pray for those schools and pray for the young men and young women that are attending those schools as they prepare themselves to be better servants of God. Mention the Light Network, Robert Hatfield. Tune into those podcasts, listen to those. There's a lot of good shows on that. I have one show on there, but it's called Ready to Worship. But there are a lot of other good shows that I
Yeah.
encourage you to go and take a part of.
Yeah. Robert does a great job. Oh, never had Robert on here either. That's another person I need to get
See, there
on.
you go. See, you just need to ask me. I'll line some people up for you. You keep me from having to come around quite so often. So
Well,
that's
I'm always
there
looking for
we go.
speakers. That's the reality of what we do here. Is I need as many people on the roster as I can get. So
Well,
uh,
Robert is a good one. I hope you'll have him. He'll do a good job. He's a lot smoother. He's done a lot more TV and radio work than I have, so he'll be a good
there
one to
you
be
go.
on the program.
All right. Hey, brother Wade, I'll let you go. I need to clean up some things. As I made that comment about our audience not being the youngest, I'm getting rebuked a little bit over here in the chat. All I can tell you, Wade, is the numbers that we get analytics from Facebook and Google about our audience.
I understand that.
All I can tell you is what those numbers tell me. That's all I can say.
I'm just creating some distance between you and me right now. So,
All right, brother. Get out of here before it gets worse, man.
yes, sir. You have a good night.
All right. Thank you, Wade. Appreciate it, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's see what we got here before y'all, get too riled up with me. Let me get my glasses back on because I can't read all the rebuke y'all are giving me without my glasses on. So give me a second here. Hey, real quick, Connie. Yeah, the Light Network is as we said, run by Robert Hatfield. It is very much like the Scattered Abroad network that we've had on here several times. Just a collection of podcasts that Robert has organized. Been around for quite a little while. I know in the past Robert and Dan Winkler used to have a show together. I don't know if that's still going on or not. But yeah, I think you can just find it on just do a Google search for the Light Network and look for Robert Hatfield's name attached to it. I believe they have their own website and you can get a collection of their podcast at all the different places. So, but yeah, that is somebody we need to have on is Robert. So anyway, let's see what we got here tonight. We have on the um, prayer request side, Sue was asking prayers for her sister Lois, who or Luis. That's gonna be Lois. Um, she is. We prayed for her in the past, and I think I've had that same issue about how to pronounce her name. She's been fighting recurrent ovarian cancer. She's had it 3 times now, but today was told there is no evidence of the disease. That is great news, Sue. And we put on a maintenance program starting next week. That is outstanding. Connie is asking us to pray for Brother Roy. We've been praying for him in the past, I believe. He's had a setback and is not doing well. Um, the Jonathan is asking us to pray for the Klein family. Tracy passed away. And also Jonathan reminding us about the prayers for all those who have lost loved ones in the Florida hurricane. Um, Lay just mentioning um, the hurricane as well. Lay the in terms of people that we would know here together on digital Bible study, I think the on the West Coast, if I'm sure we have people that view us on the West Coast from time to time. I will tell you that we have um, the Joshua Cantrell and Brian Kenyon, who's supposed to be on with us here in a couple weeks, are in the Naples area. I haven't heard from either of them. I saw a post from Brian. Sounded like he went through it okay. So he had some screens, panels of his screened in patio that were blown out. Um, But I think that's about all we have in terms of speakers. I haven't heard anything about the South Florida Avenue Church down there in Naples. Naples is like one city down from Fort Myers, where it kind of came ashore. But I don't know anything about the church in either Sarasota or Fort Myers. I'm sure there's a congregation over there, but I don't have any personal knowledge of the church in either of those cities. Maybe others do. Let's see what else. Oh, y'all are still coming in there. Jewel is asking us to pray for her. She travels back to Virginia on Monday with a visit with her spine doctor. So let's get all of those on the list and we will have a word of prayer together. So if you would, please join with me as we pray. Father, we are thankful this evening for the time we've had to study, and we thank Wade for bringing that good lesson and the reminder of the potential of both young and old to serve you and to make a difference for your cause in this world. And we pray that we'll each take that lesson to heart as it is applicable to each of us. Tonight, we're mindful of several. Of course, we continue to pray for those who have been affected by the hurricane and those who are continuing to be affected by it in the Carolinas tonight. We're mindful of all those who have lost loved ones during this time. Know a good number have perished from the storm, and we are absolutely praying your blessings upon them as they deal with this new situation, and hopefully they can um, find some time and some find a path to allow them to reflect on their relationship with you as is needed for each of them. We're mindful tonight of Sue's sister, and we're thankful for the good report about the disappearance of the cancer, and we pray that it stays that way this time. We give you thanks for that. Um, Thankful tonight, or a prayer tonight also for Roy and the setback that he has suffered. We pray that whatever urgent care can be given to him might be able to rectify that situation and that he can improve. Mindful tonight, and our sympathies are extended to the Klein family. We ask your blessings upon them as well, and the loss of Tracy. And we're also mindful tonight of Jewel as she is going to be traveling, and we hope that her appointments with the spine doctor reveal some good results, and that any discomfort that she is having can be alleviated by that testing as well. But we are thankful for so many things that you have given us in this world, and we are appreciative of all the things that you keep from us. We know that your will be done in our lives, and we pray that in each one of those circumstances, whether we are part of these requests on a nightly basis or not, we know that each need to find a place in your will, and that we need to use each opportunity in life to find a way to give you glory. And we pray that it will be done in each of our lives. And it is through your Son's name that we offer this thanks, and we ask these petitions of you. And amen. Okay, let's see what we have here. I'm sure somebody put one in. Gwen Cooper, what you say there? Brian Kenyon in South Florida congregation is Lakeland. That's Lakeland, not Naples. Someone's in Naples. Someone's in Naples. Bobby Odell used to preach there, the Naples congregation in Naples. But you're right. I had that in my brain as Naples, and you're right, Gwen. That's actually over in Lakeland. That's a little bit farther up the coast. So yeah, so they probably did okay because the storm came in a little bit farther south of them. Gene, obviously Gary Colley. We mentioned that last night. I think it was Gary Colley and Hardeman Nichols both passed in the last couple of days. So keep those families in your prayers as well. But yeah, thank you, Gwen. In my head, I had that in Naples, and they are definitely in Lakeland. That is exactly where they are. You are correct. So let's see what we have tonight. I didn't see anything on the Facebook side. On the YouTube side, we got Jonathan with 105 stars. Appreciate that a great deal, Jonathan. Patsy with 50 stars. Thank you very much, Patsy. Um, we got Claudette with 200 stars. Thank you, Claudette. And we have Valletta also with 200 stars. We appreciate that, everybody. Hopefully, we will be back to our regular broadcast schedule on Monday. Hopefully, I will not be interrupted again this week or with any kind of storm or anything like that. So, seems like something comes up just about every week these days. It has been a hectic few weeks here in Florida and for me, but I'm thankful that you all are patient with us sometimes in getting that done. But we'll be back here Monday at 8 a.m. for another episode of From the Deep End, and we will continue to go on from there. So until then, as always, it is my prayer that you will go out and make your day a great one for God. Have a good weekend, everybody.